So I just saw Dora and the Lost City of Gold, and it was, it was a very strange movie, and actually not as bad as it could have been, I guess. If the entire movie was just like the first half of it, then I would probably like it a lot more. The first half of this movie is actually pretty bonkers. Basically, Dora has been living in the Peruvian jungle while being homeschooled by her professor parents, and at age 16, they just kick her out and they're like, yeah, why don't you go to America instead? And it's actually pretty hilarious, because in this film, Dora is a character who should probably be institutionalized. She acts completely insane this whole movie, and it's kind of funny watching the other characters react to this. So yeah, surprisingly, there was an element of humor to the film that was pretty successful. What winds up taking away from it, though, is that some of the characters are really annoying. Now that I think of it, it's actually pretty impressive that this psychopathic main character was actually never really annoying to me at all. Isabella Moner actually did a pretty great job playing this character, believe it or not. She was actually really fun to watch, and she was probably the best part of this movie, especially when she's next to Eva Longoria and Michael Pena, who play her parents. Holy crap, are they ever terrible. There's a scene in the movie where both of them have to cry, and although I understand that there was some attempt at it being comedic in a way, it was so genuinely bad that I was confused as to what the characters were trying to do. I genuinely did not know if these characters were supposed to be crying or mocking someone who's crying. It was that awful. Anyway, the first half of this movie was wild, wacky, super fast-paced, and pretty fun overall. There were some cringeworthy moments where the gag just went on for far too long, and that was the point because that was supposed to be why it was funny, but it wasn't. But for the most part, I think it achieved what it was going for. The second half of this movie, however, was kind of boring. It unfortunately devolved into this sort of Uncharted Temple of Doom thing we've seen a billion times before. Oh no, traps and jungle puzzles, and there's quicksand and all that shit. And the humor did not work as well with all of these characters who were pretty much used to her by this point. The first half of this movie showed me something bizarre, wacky, and entertaining, but the second half felt way too familiar, and it started to feel like just another boring kids movie. Much of it was incredibly predictable. The stakes were either non-existent or forced. There's a scene where they're walking along a path and the ground breaks from underneath them, and then all of a sudden they're in this weird chamber. One of them pulls a switch and it starts filling with water, and they're like, oh no, we're gonna drown. And the entire time I'm just thinking, what do you mean? You just came from the roof. When the water fills up, you can just leave. Just float to the top and you're done. Even if the film didn't establish that they could swim, which it did, there are pillars in the room that you can grab onto. The film is insisting that there's some sort of tension or stakes here, but there aren't. I get it, it's a kids movie, and kids movies are dumb, so you should never expect them to do anything. Just show Dora on the screen clapping her hands saying goo goo gaga for an hour and a half, and that's a 10 out of 10 movie, because it's for kids. But it is kind of frustrating when there's no reason why this couldn't be fixed at all. How about after they fall through the ceiling, you show them walking into another room and the door closes behind them? There, problem solved, done. It's really not that difficult at all. There was another scene where the hallway that they're in shifts downward, and then they have to grab onto the sides of the wall so that they don't fall into a pit of spikes. So they slide down and jump at the last second and just jump over the pit of spikes into the other part of the hallway. And Dora's cousin is like, yeah, I knew we could do it. It was just forced perspective, see? Which was kind of confusing in terms of what exactly it was trying to communicate. Forced perspective wouldn't exactly affect the gravity in the room that you're in. I think the film was trying to imply that there was some sort of illusion that the area they were going to jump into after the pit of spikes was also tilted downward into the pit of spikes, but it wasn't. But it was just very poorly communicated because it never felt like that. Also, the way that one of them escapes that quicksand thing makes literally no sense at all. Pretty much every scene with implied peril just resorts to a cop-out by the end of it, and this is pretty much exclusive to the second half of the movie. In the first half of this movie, they just let this crazy character run around in society and see what she does. But as soon as it goes into the main plot, they're essentially just forcing these characters into whatever the script needs them to do, and that is much less entertaining. Still, I don't regret watching this movie. I wouldn't call it good, There are certainly elements of this film that worked surprisingly well and caught me off guard. The closing song of the film was actually not bad at all, much better than any of the new songs they've added to these current Disney remakes. But at its heart, it does still feel like kind of a TV movie. A lot of the effects looked pretty bad. It wasn't particularly well shot in any way. There were a lot of bad performances. The score for the film was serviceable at best. Honestly, I would recommend getting a little tipsy and seeing a late night showing of this where there's no kids around. If you want to get really trashed, you can take a drink every time they say parapata. Do not hold me responsible if you try this and get alcohol poisoning. They said it so many times that I started just hearing it as ba-da-bop-bop. So yeah, not a good movie in my opinion, but I did not hate it. Check this one out if you want. I do not regret seeing it, and it was kind of funny. And I'm giving this one a 3 out of 10. It's closer to a 4 than a 2, but it's a 3, I think. Thank you.